Hello. Hey, how you doing, Philip? Are you all right?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, very well, very well. Yeah.
Please forgive the office vibe.
Not at all, not at all. Yeah, no, it looks good. Hi, Nick. How you doing?
Oh, fine. Thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Yes, yeah. So, I'll give people a couple of minutes to come in before we get started. It's obviously the extra long weekend, isn't it? So I can only imagine people are probably either busy sort of wrapping things up or taking time off as well. But we do have about 15 people that have signed up. So, and here they are, people are just sort of filtering in. So we'll give it a minute or two before we kick off. Hey guys, welcome.
Hi, Simon.
Hey, how you doing?
Not bad, thanks.
So do you guys have plans for the super long weekend? Is anyone doing a street party?
Not quite sure about a street party, but yeah, I think there's certainly a couple of events locally for myself anyway. So, yeah, no doubt the weekend will get consumed pretty quickly.
Yeah, it always does, doesn't it? One of our neighbours, one of our friends, has bought a life-size cardboard cutout of the Queen, and he's got it on his doorstep. I think he wants to charge people for pictures. So I'm sure it's for a good cause. So yeah, I'm just thinking, I don't know how much I'm going to be up for all of that sort of activity. Actually, my wife is making 50 samosas. She's going to be frying. I'm thinking the house out for everyone on the street, so it should be fun. Yeah.
Sounds great, Simon. Send some to me.
Come over.
Yeah.
The road will be shut though, so you'll have to park up on the other street. Yeah. Awesome. So I can see we've still got a few people trickling in. It's 3 minutes past, so I'm going to make a start. And forgive me if I sort of dart around because I have to press the button to let people in. So let's make a start. So thank you guys for making it, and appreciate it is coming into the long weekend, so people have got lots of priorities. You've probably got stuff that you're trying to close out before the end of a really, really short week as well. So, but I hope to bring something that's actually really interesting in the conversation today. So some of you were on the call last week as well, and we talked then about inspirational leadership. And I offered a little technique that you can use for that. So if anybody wants to see that, I do have the replay available, so you can let me know. And today we're going to talk about conflict. So the topic of conflict seems to really resonate with people that are involved in bringing strategy to life. When we talk about driving change, driving transformation, building new products, or doing projects and programs and change, all of that stuff, it's very common that we get into this topic of conflict, and it can be really hard to manage, right? It can be quite emotional as well. So I'm going to offer a little technique that you can use for that, and a bit of thinking, a few frames of thinking that you can use to help you to navigate that. Just a point of logistics before I continue as well. So I am recording the session. I will be offering that as a replay. So just to disclose that, so if anyone has a concern, there you go. Hopefully not. And I'll start to share the screen, and it's great to see some dear friends and colleagues coming in today as well, actually. So it's awesome. So are you guys seeing a front page of a presentation? Yeah, you're not seeing my notes page, are you? You're just seeing the press. Okay, good. All right, because I've got two screens. I'm trying to make sure I've got the right thing up. So cool. So what I'll do is just talk through. So I'm creating and curating a series of topics here for this roundtable discussion. This is all about those of us that are engaged, as I say, in bringing that strategy to life, making change happen, and I call that the Aligned Programme Exec. And the topic for today, as I say, is conflict. We're going to have about a sort of 10, maybe 15 minutes of presentation of some stuff that I want to show you. And then I want to make sure that we do spend a good 10 minutes at the end, and we'll finish at past. I'll be available if people want to sort of do any further questions or whatever afterwards, but past is that sort of official close time. So what do we know about this world of change? What we know is that the pace of work is, hold on, sorry, yeah. So this first up, I think I've said all of those things, and you've all got your cameras on, or most of you got your cameras on already, so that's great. Do think about questions that you've got about the topic of conflict. It'll be really interesting to see what you think about the stuff I'm bringing today. And then we can talk more if people want to as well. So in terms of the landscape, so the Aligned Programme Executive, the pace of work is quick, the pace of change is quicker. And this is something that's been around for a lot longer than that recent conversation about, oh, it just feels like it's getting quicker all the time. Is also the reality that the more senior you get, the more you need to be able to transform and lead change. And you know, it's a phrase that Marshall Goldsmith uses that says, what got you here will not get you there. And I think that's really relevant, that if you're, you know, an operational manager of some description, whatever business function you're in, you get promoted and you get successful by doing things that are in the business, but you need to know how to really affect change as well, of course, right? And I think everyone here is involved in that in some shape or form, but taking the lead can be daunting. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is that deliveries are just unpredictable. Another is that if you've got a vision for something, but you kind of feel like maybe others aren't with you on that, and they're not seeing it the way that you see it, it can feel quite lonely. There's also the fact that you've probably got a day job, and on top of that, you're now taking all that added accountability for transforming things. You've got budget accountability, financial responsibility that comes with that as well. So that can bring extra stress, it can bring overwhelm. So all of that can get in the way of your being able to do this well, and how you want to show up to it. But there is something we can do, right? So there's a shift, and there's a program here that I'm going to be talking about more and more over the coming weeks. The key word is align. So aligning to what's important. Do you understand your purpose? Do you understand your organization's purpose as well? And therefore what the priorities really are and how you can align to those well. It's always about aligning people, and it's also about aligning actions as well. So, and I like to emphasize the word well-being in there. It's not about performance at the expense of being well. It's actually about how you do both. All of that's part of it. And so there's a framework here, align in the middle, but you can't just go there. You've got to know things with the assess phase, and you've got to know how to tune things once you've done some aligning. So I'll explain more about all of that. So I call this a development pipeline. You've got those 3 phases, and today we're going to talk about conflict. So I'm just going to sort of whiz through in terms of, there's content under each one of those that we go a lot deeper on, and I'll be talking about different topics in this meeting, in this roundtable in the weeks to come as well. But today it's all about conflict. So a couple of quotes, a couple of really good authors on the topic actually as well. And I'm going to use one of those in particular today. So at work, it isn't if conflict will happen, it's when, right? And I feel that in the work that I do and have done, that it comes up a lot when humans come together, there's going to be some sort of disagreement, and our ability to express it and our ability to manage it skillfully makes all the difference. Yeah. So that's words that I find quite powerful and inspiring in terms of, well, you know, this is something that you can't avoid. And if you try to avoid it, there's a downside to that. So how can we do it well? There's a key question here about your preference, your attitude towards conflict, and whether you are somebody that seeks it or whether you are somebody that avoids it. So this was just a poll I did on Monday on LinkedIn, and it's interesting to see actually there seems to be a preference away from doing conflict from the people that have voted in that poll. So that's interesting. We're going to talk more about that, your attitude towards conflict, a little bit in a slide or two as well. And there's different levels and layers. So I'm just going to go through a few frames of concept here, and then we'll like I said, we'll do some questions in about 10 minutes. So the first layer to think about with conflict is at the organization level. So this is an example of what's called a polarity. So you guys may recognize that our organizations are often on a mission to make something different. And it can sometimes feel like we go on an oscillation, right? We go this direction for 5 years, and then new leadership comes in and there's a new strategy and we go in a different direction. And over the course of those cycles, it feels like we're going this way and then we're going that way. There's an interesting dynamic at play there. This is an example of centralized functions versus decentralized functions. I've been involved in those kind of projects where we've been bringing change management into a centralized function, or we've been moving it out and putting it into the businesses, into the business line. So that's just one example of what can happen at the organization level that actually drives conflict and disagreements. So this polarities thing is all about understanding that there are things that we want from the right-hand side of this diagram of centralizing functions. We get some good things from that. We get standardized processes, we get consistency, all of that stuff. It's you know, why you would do a centralizing project. What we don't want is over here on the left-hand side is the stuff that is bad about having decentralization, right? Which is inefficiencies and inconsistencies, all that stuff. But of course, you can have too much of a good thing, and that's where that oscillation happens. And so then on the next page, you can start to see that actually there's a downside to having centralized, of course, and there's also good stuff about decentralizing. So that's one of the frames of thinking that I'm going to talk about in a future session, is how do you handle that level of complexity when it comes to the context around which you're operating, and how can we understand that? So that's just one piece. There's another piece, of course, there's lots of other pieces. The next one from the organization, if we come down a level and we start to think about teams, this is an assessment which is called the Game Changer Index. So it's basically a tool that you can answer a bunch of questions and you can get an answer of your profile that looks something like these leader team A and leader team B profiles. That's an individual's scores on the different corners of this picture on the left-hand side. On the left-hand side, what you're looking at, let's just keep it really simple for right now. On the top right, you've got someone who's a game changer. That's someone who likes to invent things and likes to see the future and has an urge to come up with new ideas. And then on the bottom left corner, a sort of opposing pole of that is an implementer. What drives them is getting things done. So they're not really interested in coming up with new ideas and being creative, but they are really driven by getting things done. So you can see how those two might sort of interact with each other. This is how you can start to understand that we all show up differently. We have different energies of how we show up to the work. And if my way of being as a leader is different to my team, that can drive conflict as well. Yeah. So an example of that might be on the right hand side. If you've got a team leader who's got a reasonably high score on the top right on Game Changer, but it looks like the team has none of that, they're at 0%. Is there an agitation factor that comes through from that? That's the kind of thing that you can start to understand when we analyze things a little bit more deeply, and we start to depersonalize the things that are driving conflict. And that's really what the next bit's going to be about. Yeah. So for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to talk about a particular tool, a particular model that you can actually use in your work that follows on from these. And that is here, if I can get the slide to move. There you go. So we talked a little bit about conflict preferences. That comes from this book. So this is Amy Gallo, and I'm going to spend a couple of slides talking about her work. And you can use this, you can actually take this away. If anybody wants the slides, or if you want a replay, then just let me know, send me a message. But the first thing to think about is, what is my stance personally towards conflict? Do I avoid it or do I seek it? That's the first thing to start to understand as you approach the topic of conflict. So if you're thinking there about, if I'm an avoider, I'm doing these things. I value harmony, and I might not want to disrupt. I might not want to have a difficult conversation. But there are lots of us who really like having a bit of an argument, actually, like to have a disagreement, like to get it out in the open, don't mind ruffling feathers. Yeah. Does that make sense? I'm sure you can recognize that. Yeah, I see a couple of nods, right? So I think this is a really powerful thing to understand. The next thing to do with that is then understand, if I'm working with someone else who's a seeker, but I'm an avoider, how does that interplay between us? That's what you can start to think about. Yeah, and there's a page on that in a second. This is the key one that I'm going to spend some time on and give a few examples. And then there's other things that I'm not going to spend time on, but are available, and you can let me know if you want to learn more about those things, but I'll flash them up. This is about the types of conflict. This is a really great way to take the personality and the emotion out of a conflict in your team, in your groups, where you are able to understand, well, what's driving this disagreement? What's driving this conflict? What's the source of it? Yeah. So you can see the words. It could be a clash of personalities, which is a relationship conflict, a task process, or a status conflict. And you probably recognize some of those things just looking at the words. Think about status. You and a peer are competing for credit on something. That happens, right? Or you might just see things differently. So the way that I like to think about this in particular, I've had conflicts through my career, which have been about process. How do we get there? Or of course, if you're talking about transformation and change, product programs, do we actually agree on where we're going? And if we're not actually clear on where we're going, we haven't got a shared goal, then of course we're putting in different directions, right? So a few examples of that. One of my examples is working with a CFO and a CSO, so a chief finance officer and a chief strategy officer, who obviously have different jobs, different things that they need to make happen. And the CFO, I would guess, is definitely a seeker of conflict, but also thinking about the game changer index, is a polisher, likes things to be right. So we don't just make decisions to go and spend money and invest in this project just because you've got a new idea. Whereas the chief strategy officer's job description is to invent new things and to come up with new ideas and to go after revenue. And so working in that setting with the CSO as my sponsor on a program for a new product, there was a lot of disagreements and a lot of wasted energies that comes out of that. And so I would relate that to, there's a relationship, task and process conflict going on in that particular example. So that's just one example. And there's so many others that I'm sure you guys can think of, and maybe we can go there in the Q&A and see what you think about this frame. But that page there, it's in the book, or I can share the materials with you, like I say. But that's a frame that you can use to start to depersonalize a conflict. A couple of ways to use that. One is that you can facilitate a conflict in your team using this as a model. So let's take the personalities out and try to understand it. Or you can get someone from outside to do that for you if you're vested in the disagreement. But you can also use it on a personal basis. If you're having a conflict with a colleague, then reflecting about this can help you prepare for that conversation, right? And to help you understand, well, what's behind their way of being and how do I work with them better, right? So that's the frame that you've got in this particular tool. Following on from that, I'm just going to flash up things that you can do. And there's everything from do nothing to leave, and between those, addressing it in different ways. Yeah, I personally, I like to address things directly. I like to clear the air, but that's not always the best course of action. Sometimes you can get someone else to influence for you, and that's the addressing it indirectly. So some ideas there of what to do. And then you can start thinking about your body language. Do you know someone? This one, I kind of laughed at this one because I can easily think of someone who takes up too much space at the table in a meeting, right? And it's a very noticeable thing. So that's just one of many, many examples of how do you exhibit your attitude towards conflict, right? So that's the thought process, and that's it. So I'm going to stop there and see what questions you guys have. I'll just flash that up as well. So if anybody wants to talk more deeply about any of this stuff, then you can book a call, and I'll share details on how to do that afterwards as well. But let me stop the share and let's look at each other a bit more and have a bit more of a conversation now about what do you think about what I've just shared so far, and how does conflict show up for you in your work?
Well, I think certainly people don't like dealing with difficult people or dealing with conflict as it comes, but we all have to across the board, whether it's at project or program level or within the team structure of people that you, or the larger organization that you manage. I suppose across the board, the higher, regardless of what level you are or the higher you go, it's a constant thing that is there that has to be dealt with. I'm personally quite a seeker, I think, Simon. I think we kind of having looked at those two sides, I never kind of realized, but I do like to address a lot of the things directly head on, purely because I'd like to think my heart's in the right place. I'm trying to do it for the right reasons, and it has come from maturity over the years to understand that sometimes you just need to put yourself in the other person's shoes and build a relationship for that conflict or for that thing, you know, for that issue to die down, and to establish a better working relationship for the overall objective that we're trying to achieve. So certainly have come across it. At times, it is better to remove a difficult person from the situation, and you know, in the interest of team cohesion, in the interest of achieving the objectives that we have set out as a collective unit. Those are always very difficult conversations to have, but I look up to like someone like Alex Ferguson, who wouldn't, you know, who wouldn't boot some of these superstars out of it if they weren't good for the dressing room, and would get rid of them within a heartbeat. So that was my.
That's a lovely example, actually. Yeah, that's really strong. Yeah, and so in Gallo's work, right, one of the things that she talks about is what you've just said is, I really agree with it, but it is so hard to do, right? And so one of the things to understand is, can I guess what the other person's stance might be towards the conflict? If we're both seekers, that can be quite explosive, right? We both get a kick out of having a bit of a disagreement, right? And what does that do to our relationship? But also, what does it do to our colleagues around us, right? If we're doing that, if we're locking horns, you know? So that's one thing to think about. But then also, if I'm a seeker and you're an avoider, I can come across as a bully. So that's the downside of dealing with it, of course, you know? If you're not sensitive to things like that, if we're both avoiders, then we basically won't want to have a difficult conversation, right? So there's so many different permutations of that. It's a 2x2, actually, if you kind of frame it that way. But it's to say, if we're both avoiders, maybe we never deal with the difficult conversation, and that causes dysfunction in the long term, because maybe you haven't really dealt with a risk or a stakeholder that really is going to be negatively impacted by what you're doing, but you didn't have a robust debate, right? So there's so many factors. Yeah. What more, guys? So yeah, Raghav, I see you come off mute.
Yeah. Just thinking about it and having listened to what we've gone through, what's running to my mind is I'm probably selective seeker on certain things like process, perhaps a selective avoider on certain occasions. Is that something that you've seen, or
yes? Were you going to say, is that okay?
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, and it's context dependent, isn't it?
It is absolutely context dependent. because when it comes to process, when you know you're trying to set things right and putting it back on tracks, then I don't hesitate to seek to make things right, even if it's conflict. Where it's less impactful for the end goal, I probably avoid, because I know it's not going to result in anything fruitful. So I'll probably avoid it in those situations when it's of little value.
Yeah, so there's a distinction to think about. One is my preference, and that is the seek or avoid is what I like. Yeah. And then there's the response strategy. So regardless of my preference, there is a strategy of do nothing when you can see that the risk of addressing something is actually really high. It could be counterproductive. It could do more harm than good. So you've actually made a skillful assessment of the situation there. You could be wrong, you could be right, depending on how experienced you are with the people and the situation, all that stuff. But that's actually a great example of using this kind of thinking to say, well, what would be the right approach here? What would be the best response? Yeah. So that's what I would offer, is just to distinguish between those two pages that were in the presentation. One is the response, and one is your actual inbuilt preference. If you know that, it helps you understand, oh, I'm feeling something here. What's going on, right? And how does that impact on what I say? Yeah. Go ahead. I see, Nick, you're off mute now.
I suppose, I'd just be interested. I suppose one of the challenges I've sort of come across is sometimes sort of when you're leading a project or program of work, and then you've probably got some, more junior people on the team who are sort of, either challenging some of the ways of working or the processes, for example. But sometimes there's just that point in a project where you're sort of clear on what the next steps are, and you're also trying to help educate the sort of more junior people as well. But sometimes conflict can be created in that context where they're thinking they sort of need to go off in sort of, one direction, but actually from an overall project perspective, if you go off in that direction, you're never actually going to achieve your next milestone, and really you need to be going in the other direction. Sometimes I suppose just sometimes it is quite a challenge, just sort of, whilst you're trying to educate the junior people, but also do your job at the same time, if you know what I mean. So
you're looking to create a learning opportunity for them at the same time as keeping them on,
not wanting to. I wouldn't want to sort of push anyone's thoughts or ideas away, but at the same time, you want to sort of try and push them in the right direction for the project. Based on your experience, you're like, right, okay, this is the way we need to go, but you're sort of wanting to do that without quashing the sort of the ideas and potentially some of the innovation they might have had. And sometimes, and I know it's weird, you usually expect sort of that conflict to be with more senior people, but actually sometimes I find it more of a challenge with junior people, because sometimes they've got some really, really cool ideas, but then actually in terms of the overall progress of the project, you're sort of needing to take it in another direction. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's a whole load of things in that that you might be thinking about in terms of, one of them I'm seeing is situational leadership, which is understanding the experience and the willingness of that individual to play the game that you need them to play, right? So that's one part of it, is how do you know the difference between someone that needs more guidance, more direction from you, versus someone who's actually got it but just needs to be left alone to get on with it. That's part of it, isn't it? Part of their experience level. And then the conflict, I suppose, is linked in there in terms of how you communicate with them, isn't it? How you handle that communication in the best way. Yeah. there's so many examples that we can call out. So one of them I had, so look, it's past, and I appreciate people might have other meetings and stuff. So if you need to go, then this is our official close, but I'm happy to stick around for a little bit more of a chat. So completely up to you guys. Yeah, I was going to just mention an example of, I had a couple of colleagues, a couple of team members who were both in the same role as BAs, business analysts, but were really, yeah, go ahead, Anish, nice to see you. We're in the same role, but one of them had like 30 years experience in this particular subject, and the other was completely new to the domain and had, you know, maybe 7 years experience in the job. And so they had really different approaches and were stepping on each other's toes a little bit. One of them felt like, you know, I know what I'm doing. I've got loads of experience. You should do what I'm telling you to do, basically, even though you don't work for me. We weren't in that kind of interaction, you know. Whereas the other one is bristling at that and saying, well, I thought I was taking charge of that particular task and that conversation with that stakeholder. Why are you getting in my way? And over time, it was getting worse and worse. And I had, you know, thankfully, with, you know, COVID restrictions lifted, we were able to actually be together in an office, which was fun. Part of the work was just getting people together. But we used this frame. We used the Amy Gallo framework of depersonalizing the conflict. And it led to a really healthy sharing of, I feel this way when this happens, right? And it really made a massive difference, actually. Yeah. What more?
It's really, it's really good to hear, because I think, the last thing I'd want to do is sort of, you know, quash anyone's sort of, I don't know what the right word, you know, their motivation, their oomph, so to speak. Do you know what I mean?
Enthusiasm comes to mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to quash that. But yeah, as you say, sometimes it's just sort of finding that right balance between sort of, you know, just having that sort of more of a directional conversation rather than sort of saying to someone, yeah, you've got to do that because I told you so. Just maybe, I think sometimes, just offering some sort of general words of advice or just, a bit of directional conversation sometimes sort of supports that approach, I think.
Yeah. It's knowing when to pick which tool is part of it, right? Which is easier said than done. But that's the art of it. Yeah, brilliant. So absolutely, it's fun. I'm going to be doing more of these conversations in the weeks ahead, and that development pipeline is going to be the stuff. So there's going to be conversations about all sorts of interesting people stuff like this in the context of what we do in terms of transformation. So yeah, Philippa, I see you came off mute.
Well, I was just going to say thanks for sharing that, Nick, because I feel a bit of a kindred spirit with that. I've recently stepped into a management position, and I have a relatively junior team. And for anyone that doesn't know, I do recruitment. It's how I know Simon. And we definitely have times where I have to pace set as a manager, and then there's definitely times where I can have that coaching conversation. But in my opinion, I probably wouldn't be having, unless it was around with some of these junior people, unless it was around non-performance or lack of performance, a conflict conversation when I'm pace setting. I will probably have it when I'm having the appraisals or the when the pace has died down a little bit, the coaching conversation to signpost to go exactly what you just said there, Simon, around how does this make you feel, and you know, when you do this, it makes me feel this way. And I've definitely learned the hard way when to have those conversations and when not to. It's a bit of an art to know which tool to use when. But I'm learning. Fortunately, we have a pretty good L&D team here, so I've definitely got that support. But it's a bit of a minefield. I completely agree, because you don't want to stifle the ideas and the creativity, because that's actually what challenges us to be better, me to be better, and the business to be better. So absolutely. But any ideas on how to do that better, I'm all ears. So
yeah, I would definitely point you towards situational leadership. If you just Google that, you'll see some good content. It's another 2x2, and it's like skill and will in a nutshell. Understanding that, and then it's about timing and pacing, isn't it? So going back to like Amy Gallo's thing about those different responses. In this moment, I choose to do nothing. But in a week's time, when the dust has settled, then I choose to address it. That's an example of that. So you don't have to actually, they're not mutually exclusive. It could just be a timing consideration sometimes as well, can't it? So yeah, wicked. So I'm conscious that we've gone over by, 6 minutes or something. So, but yeah, really fun. Thank you for bringing yourselves to the conversation. And like I said, there'll be more of this. And if anybody does want to follow up more in depth, then you know where to find me. So awesome. Have fun. Enjoy the long weekend. I'm going to be eating samosas
for the next few weeks.
Yeah. I don't know. They might all get nabbed. They might all get taken by the neighbours, probably. So yeah, let's see.
Well, nice to meet you all.
Yeah.
And
likewise.
Enjoy your weekends.
Likewise.
Yeah. And you take care.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.